Right, I think we'll kick off there. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Nicholas Boyce Smith. I'm the director of Create Streets. Delighted to be working with the V&A and with the World Monuments Fund for this, I think, the fourth of our Planning Forward webinars. For those of you who don't know, Create Streets is a London-based social enterprise and associated charity. We do research into the relationships between urban design and well-being, and we put that into practice mainly by working with community groups and neighbourhood groups in the UK. They're a little bit outside the UK as well. And that is all from me. We're delighted, as I say, to be working with the V&A, to be spreading our reach. And over to Laura, who will be chairing us this evening. Laura.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, and hello everyone and welcome. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Laura Jones. I'm the Cultural Heritage Preservation Lead at the Victoria and Albert Museum, as you can see here in London. Here I'm the convener of the museum's Culture in Crisis programme, which is a programme that brings together those with a shared interest in protecting cultural heritage, providing a forum for sharing information, inspiring and supporting action, and raising public awareness. For those of you who are interested in learning more about that, I'll pop a link into the web chat in a moment. But today I'm going to be playing the role of host, introducing you, our audience, to our speakers and guiding us through a conversation. So today we're here to talk about a very important subject, retaining the spirit of place in post-conflict communities, learning lessons from Iraq and Libya. As you'll have read in the event description before joining today, we'll be looking at what the future holds for the Middle East and North Africa's historic towns and cities. We'll be talking primarily about two specific case studies, Benghazi in Libya and Amedi in Iraq. We'll be discussing how conflict over the past 20 years, and particularly following the 2011 uprising, has done huge harm to some towns. And at the same time, other cities face risks through modernisation, which in many cases causes antagonisms between the past and the future, impacting heavily on communities and their heritage too. So today we're asking, is another better future possible? One in which historic places can act as a bridge from the past to the future, from old cultural memories into new ones? And how can the region's historic towns and cities evolve and provide their residents with humane, connected, culturally enriched and sustainable lifestyles? Now, in a world where travel is currently limited, we can often feel rather disconnected from people and places around the world. Digital events like these have been great to keep in touch, but sometimes it's rather hard to visualize what some of the incredible landmarks and spaces that we're talking about over Zoom really are. So I'm really pleased to let you know that we've recorded a video to share with you to kick things off today and quite literally set the scene for the discussion later on. The next 7-minute video was recorded by the wonderful Saman Abdulkareem, an architect from Duhok University in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Saman is interested in the rehabilitation, conservation and development of towns, that cities that have diverse ethnicities, religion and cultural backgrounds as well. Saman is now going to take us on an informal walking tour across Amedi, capturing sights, sounds and the character of the town too. I hope you'll enjoy feeling a little bit transported through that Zoom portal to feel some of the spirit of place that we'll be talking about later today. And we're over to the video now. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Saman. I am an architect and a musician from Iraqi Kurdistan, and I'm going to take you on a short tour in Amedi. As we can see, that Amedi is located on in a mountain. It's a natural place, and it's visible from the roads in the surrounding, and that's a very significant feature of the town. There are several statues on the way to Amedi and inside the town itself of famous people from Amedi. The old minarets represent history of Islamic architecture in the town, and with the grand mosque that has a significant feature of traditional architecture mixed with the Islamic architecture. Now we are passing through the bazaar, the old market. Uh, there are several stores for variety of the goods and products from Amedi area and the surrounding territories. And this is Kitani House that locates in the northern edge of Amedi Citadel. The house belongs to Kitani family. The remaining parts are showing the architecture style of the traditional housing in Amedi. This fantastic structure is the bar gate. The gate consists of 3 stone. Has an ornamentation, a figure of an eagle and 2 snakes. Now I'm going to show you some examples of the old houses in Amedi neighborhoods. The urban fabric of the town has an organic form according to the topography of the area and also the methods in urban growth in the traditional architecture. The domed structures are the tomb of the prince family's member who were ruling the Badinani Emirate in Amedi. One of the most significant historical parts of Amedi town is the Mosul Gate. Mosul Gate, located on the west side of Amedi, facing Mosul. My dog Rainbow was super excited to have a walk in Amedi and was exploring the area. This is his first time to be there.
Absolutely terrific. Thank you so much, Saman, and also to Rainbow the dog. That's possibly the best animal acting I've seen so far this June. Having now set the scene for you all, I'm next going to introduce you to some of our wonderful speakers. Each of them is going to be giving you a quick fire presentation of no more than 5 minutes, and I've got my finger on a very special buzzer to tell them a little bit about who they are, what they do, and more specifically why they're a voice in today's discussion. Following this, we're going to bring them back up onto the stage and have a roundtable discussion together, which gives them a chance to explore some of the themes that they're going to raise more deeply in that discussion. Now, I'm relying on you, our audience today, to help me out. I've got a few questions tucked in my pocket to ask the speakers, but this event is designed to facilitate, actually encourage our audience to join that discussion. We want to hear from you what you're thinking and how these issues relate to you in your own way. Use the chat to say hello, pose us some questions, and contribute some of your valuable perspectives too. To kick us off, why not tell us who you are and where you're joining us from today? Remembering to make sure that you're selecting the option just above the typing box that says send message to all attendees and panelists. There's my first message heading into the box now. Now, before I hand over to our first speakers, in fact, why don't we start with a bit of audience participation? We've got a quick polling question for you, which we're going to get up on the screen now. Lovely. Just take a little read through these. You've got a moment or two to read through and offer your version, your response. And whilst you do your hard work, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker to do theirs. Now, Nada Elfeituri, who's a fellow of Create Streets, is a Libyan architect who's worked on the reconstruction and research in post-conflict contexts, notably in Benghazi city centre. She's worked as an urban designer for Create Streets and now works for a borough council too. So after you've clicked through that, you'll be able to see Nada's lovely face and she can begin her presentation for us today.
Thanks so much, Laura. I'm just going to share my screen.
Thanks, Nada.
And thank you also to Saman for that great tour through Amedi. So jumping to the city of Benghazi, of course, the context here is quite different from Amedi, where we have the challenge posed by reconstruction in historic city centers. And I think the case of Benghazi is one that is very relevant to what's happening in much of the region today. In the interest of time, I'm going to try and summarize the past 10 years in 30 seconds. So the Middle East and North Africa witnessed what was called the Arab Spring, the transition to democratic systems of governments after overthrowing authoritarian regimes. This process is not easy or straightforward, as we have come to realize. And the past 10 years has been defined largely by instability, fragility in many countries in the region. I think in Benghazi, we kind of were brought down to reality from our revolutionary euphoria with the assassination of the US ambassador in the city and the realization that we actually do have a very big problem with security in the city, with our weak governance system, inheriting a very broken system. And this led to a lot of urban violence, a lot of civil disobedience, which came to a head in 2014 with the start of the conflict in Libya between the in Benghazi, between the Libyan National Army and paramilitary forces and extremist groups in the city, which officially ended in 2017. And I put these dates down with the caveat that urban conflict does not have a specific start and end date. These things kind of continue, and their effects continue long after guns have been put down. And the reconstruction in the city has been ongoing in the context of political fragmentation, a political legitimacy crisis in Libya, where there's still a conflict between different governments, each vying for power. Although recently we've had unification with one government, so fingers crossed that continues. So just to give some numbers to the conflict, over 400,000 people were displaced from their homes, including my family in Benghazi. And many of them stayed in the city and were housed with relatives. They were housed in schools in different parts of the city. An estimated 20,000 landmines were planted in the areas of conflict, many of which are still in place today and which pose a very big risk to the reconstruction process. And it's estimated by the municipal council that 1.4 billion euros in damages were done, although this number might be higher when you factor in also infrastructure damages. And of course, with conflict comes the mental toll. Almost 300% increase in post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health issues were reported. And this is a much smaller number, I expect, than what is actually on the ground from those who do not report how the conflict has affected them mentally. This map highlights sort of the challenges and issues faced by areas in Benghazi that were affected by the conflict. And you can see a lot of it range from infrastructure issues, environmental issues, but then also things like a lack of recreational spaces. And this was an interesting finding when we were doing our reconstruction projects, where people were saying, yes, okay, I do want my house to be reconstructed, but then what about the other spaces, the outdoor spaces? Where can I take my children to play? The area that was most damaged by the conflict was Benghazi city center, the historic core of the city. And this map highlights sort of the concentration of the damages. Because the city center is one of the densest areas in the city, a lot of very narrow alleyways, it was the one that was most severely damaged. And it's the place where the conflict lasted the longest between the different armed groups. Why is Benghazi city center so important? It is the historic core of Benghazi and contains architecture and heritage landmarks that span the city's history, from Greek ruins on the coast to Arab Islamic architecture to Ottoman, Italian, colonial, and post-war architecture. It really is sort of the beating heart of the city. It has significant cultural and historic value. When you ask someone to describe what Benghazi means to them, a lot of the time they will use an image of a building from the city center. And it's where most of the heritage buildings are located. Because of its special status, the reconstruction has gone on longer in Benghazi than any other place in the city, in the city center, because there are specialist materials, many things constructed from limestone, whereas the rest of the city, you'll see a lot more cement and concrete construction. And because of the widespread damage, it's not a matter of replacing doors or windows. A lot of these buildings, because of aerial bombardment, of really heavy weaponry being used, the very foundations of the building need to be examined. Many of these buildings will need to be torn down and rebuilt with new foundations. And so there's a big need for specialist knowledge and materials that at the moment don't exist in the numbers and in the capacity that we need. And of course, the other threat is development projects which are being proposed in the city center, which are not sensitive to the context. You have private businessmen who want to tear down buildings that could be renovated to make way for a big mall or a hospital or something that a private hospital, something that really does not add any social value, but rather is a means of generating revenue. And so these are kind of the main challenges we're seeing right now. Aside, of course, from the challenge of when you talk about reconstruction, everyone has a different image in their head. So some people are imagining skyscrapers, some people are imagining that you reconstruct it exactly as it was before. And I think trying to bring together these different views to create one common roadmap or one common vision for how it should be rebuilt is also an obstacle that we're trying to overcome. But this doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of amazing work happening already on the ground in Benghazi. And I wanted to share a few examples with you. So this is the Plaza of the Tree. It's a very important public space in Benghazi. It has a lot of historical importance. It was, of course, damaged as much of the city center. And a local organization decided to adopt the project and collect donations, get money from businessmen, and mobilize volunteers. And this is what the plaza looks like today after the reconstruction. So you can see here, sort of, this is the before and the after. And it was their way of trying to revive the city center and trying to revive, the perception that life is coming back to normal slowly but surely by bringing this public space back to life. Another really fantastic building project that was done was the renovation of what's called the Kirchya House. So it's one of the oldest existing Ottoman buildings, homes, in the city center. And it was converted to a cultural center, again, damaged during the conflict, and the Historic City Authority, with funding from UNDP, managed to renovate it. And this is what it looks like today. And they launched the opening by setting up a musical event. So there was some lovely classical Libyan music. There were photo galleries, picture galleries. And I think this is an important point, this link between tangible and intangible cultural heritage, and the fact that people see their intangible cultural heritage so intrinsically linked to these places. And we're seeing a lot of this in different parts of the city where people will try and open up a newly renovated space with these kind of events. Another very interesting example is the reconstruction of the Omar Mukhtar Shrine in Benghazi. And this one is interesting because this building was not damaged during the conflict. This building was demolished 20 years ago by Gaddafi as part of his campaign to remove many significant cultural heritage buildings in the city center. And I think this reconstruction process is allowing people to really think about what reconstruction looks like even in the long term. So not just bringing back what was destroyed, but looking even further to what was taken away. And again, this event was marked by a day where they asked young men in the city to come wearing traditional Libyan outfits. And you can see that's what they're wearing in this picture to mark the opening of the shrine. Again, this link between different types of cultural heritage and value and expression in the city. To wrap up very quickly, what will the future look like for Benghazi? I think it's a slow process, but I do believe it's going in the right direction because we are seeing a lot of very locally led grassroots initiatives, but we're also seeing international support to these local initiatives. I think what we would like to see more of is raising the profile of Benghazi on the national stage. So that will help us better protect many of these heritage buildings, as well as capacity building and technical training for reconstruction actors themselves. So with some of the examples I showed you, the reconstruction isn't necessarily done in the way that it perfectly should be with the right materials, the right tools. It's kind of, a lot of it is done in a very ad hoc way. And I think what we kind of need to see on the next level is more care to the core of these buildings and public spaces. And of course, enabling regional networks of solidarity, like what we're doing here with our colleagues from Iraqi Kurdistan, to kind of learn best practices and ways forward to reconstruction. And hopefully I didn't take up too much time, and thank you.
Neda, it was so fascinating. I think I'll forgive you. Excellent. Next up, we have Shireen Ishmael from the World Monuments Fund. Shireen is a professor at the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Duhok. She's an expert on Amedi, and via her teaching work and expertise, advances the protection of vernacular heritage of Northern Iraq's historic towns. So I'm really looking forward to this presentation. Shireen, over to you. Sorry, Shireen, I might just ask you to unmute for this.
Okay.
Thank
you so much. Yeah, and now it's okay, yeah?
Perfect.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. As you said, I'm a lecturer at the University of Duhok, but also working with the government in the planning committee in the Duhok province level. I will share my slides with you to give more input about the significance of the Amedi city. As you see, Amedi in this map, it's in the north of Iraq in Kurdistan region, 15 kilometers to the Turkish border. As you see in the photos, the city has an elliptical shape with less than 1 kilometer, 1 square kilometer area on the hilltop, and about 300 meters above the surrounding area. Also, it's surrounded with mountain from the south and also the north. So this elliptical shape and the location of the city with that surrounding nature gives the city a unique landscape.
Shireen?
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt you mid-flow. Would you mind awfully pressing the button to make the presentation full screen just so we can see these images?
Okay.
Thank you ever so much. I think it's just up near the top on that toolbar.
Let's see. Yeah.
Amazing.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So here in this map, you can see the Amedi city, and we have seen in the video with Saman, with my colleague Saman, many of these sites. 8 of the sites are registered in the national list of Iraq that backs to 1970. Originally, the Amedi city was a castle, Medi castle, And the first mention to the name of the city backs to 900 years BC, when it has been conquered by Assyria. So unfortunately, among those sites, the registered sites, the most historical quarters were not registered as heritage, which is clear in this map, this area, which is the most historical quarters. Jewish quarters, Jewish quarter and Christian and Sabbath quarter. So from the archaeological sites, from the history, from the name of the quarters, you can easily conclude that the city, for a long time, there were different religion groups were living together in this city until 1940s, when the Jewish people forced to leave the city. So for the country whole. Yeah. The first voluntary initiative started at 2012. It was a raising awareness workshop involving the residents from the Amedi city to select the valuable sites that they think it needs to be protected. They value these sites. So they identified many sites. And the second also voluntary work done by architects from the university, and also from by engineers in with the government staff. So they did like survey and document the historical buildings remain in the city. Also, one of the challenges in the city, since there is no space for expansion, so we found it's very important to address the land use in the city to fulfill the needs, the current needs of the residents in the city. This also has been done voluntarily. Then the important step, it was with World Monument Fund through the World Monument Watch Day. And this time we targeted the young people to include them in the discussion and to explain the significance of the city to them, and also the tangible and intangible heritage that the city has. The second important step, it was through the project Planning the Future of Amedi, also with coordination with World Monument Fund. For this step, it was very important because we started to set the guidelines for the three zones being selected in the area, the Kitani House and the Old Bazaar, and also the cluster of 3 houses in the city. So we have had 3 groups. They collected hundreds of photos, old maps, just to illustrate how the bazaar was look like in the past. So these are some results of their work after collecting a lot of data in terms of the materials, the design of the shops. The same strategy has been taken for Kitani House also, through the photos, talking to the people, talking to the owners, the residents who are around this complex. So they have illustrated how the house was originally, and also setting the guidelines for the future use as a culture center in the city. The other example, it was from the group of 3 traditional houses we have taken. Also, the group were collecting a lot of data in terms of the design, doing a lot of dimensions, talking to the owners, the neighbors, to illustrate how these houses were look like. So the important, why I say that this is an important step done, this is because this time we have had external expertise involved in the discussion. So it was a knowledge exchange among the different expertise from different countries. So those are my slides, and thank you so much. And I'm waiting questions.
Thank you so much, Shireen. Terrific presentation. We're going to have a chance to run back to gather everyone together at the end for some more questions. But for now, I'm going to pass over to our third speaker for today, our third and final speaker, John Darlington, who is the Executive Director of the World Monuments Fund Britain. John is an archaeologist as well as an author who joined WMF in 2015 to lead the British affiliate here in the UK. He's helped coordinate various WMF projects in Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Yemen, with the support of the British Council's Cultural Protection Fund. So finally, I'll pass over to you, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. I shall now share my screen, or try to share my screen. Okay, hopefully, can people see that? You can, excellent. World Monuments Fund is an organisation which stands for the preservation of irreplaceable heritage across the world, not just places like Machu Picchu or Angkor Wat, but actually special places like Amedi, which was, as Shireen said, a World Monuments Watch site in 2016, and places such as Benghazi. What I'm trying to do, will seek to do for the next 4 or 5 minutes, is actually just within the context of this conversation, is to share perhaps just 4 lessons that we, World Monuments Fund, has learnt from our work in Amedi, which might be relevant to Benghazi. The project which Shireen has briefly touched upon was a Cultural Protection Fund project designed to create a strategic framework for planning within Amedi to ensure the preservation of its very distinctive character. So very quickly then, the 4 lessons which I'm going to share. Lesson number 1 is that local partnership and knowledge is absolutely essential. It's critical. From an external organisation's perspective, parachuting in and then leaving is just not sustainable. So this local partnership work is beautifully illustrated actually by Shireen's slides and indeed by Saman's video beforehand. So it's really important to connect locally with, in this case, the University of Duhok, but also in the picture that you can see there, the civic authorities, because they're the people who are going to have to ensure that the policies are correct and fit for the protection of places like Amedi. So that's lesson number 1. These are all obvious ones, but it's worth stating them. Lesson number 2 is that it has to be community up. So whilst you need to engage and have the ownership of the planning authorities and the political authorities, you also need to engage with the people who live, who work, and who play in places like Amedi. So we spent a large amount of time interviewing people locally, interviewing exactly those people to understand what is it that they cherish about this particular place, what's important to them, what do they want to preserve. And it's also important to ask in the right way. So we also engaged with a large number of students. A classic way of engaging with certain people is to do it through getting them to draw what they value. And so these students drew amazing pictures, some entirely expected, such as the Mosul Gate, which we've seen, or the beautiful views. Others, such as the local wildlife or local produce, was perhaps something that we didn't expect to quite such an extent. So engaging locally is really important. The third lesson is all about retaining a distinctive character of a place. So this for us is very, very important. In terms of the future planning of Amedi should be based around how you preserve and indeed enhance the distinctive character of Amedi. So this is a case of not cutting against those characteristics. And it's not a backwards thing, as I'm sure many people know. This is about ensuring that Amedi's historic character is preserved and enhanced as an economic driver, as well as for preservation's sake. Nor is it about stopping development, but ensuring that new development enhances the spirit of place. At the end of this, you don't want Amedi to look like a man, you want Amedi to look like Amedi, and that's the whole purpose. And then the final thing to say is not to underestimate the importance of intangible heritage as well as bricks and mortar. You can see in these illustrations that for the people of Amedi, those who live and who visit, the feature of the river which runs past the citadel is really important, a place where people can picnic, where they can celebrate the new year, where they can meet families. Equally, we've heard Saman's music. There he is playing a saz in the middle illustration. And if you want to know where I think the best tahini in the world comes from, well, in my view, it comes from Amedi. And there you can see bottom right are the tahini mills, or the sesame seed mills. And one final thought, and that is the simple pomegranate tree. Each garden in Amedi used to have a pomegranate tree and maybe another fruit tree. They're important not just as a fruit that you can eat, but they're also important spaces in which people can rest and relax and have conversations underneath them. They're very much part of the social fabric of Amedi. So if in the future you lose just those simple trees through development, you're actually losing one of the defining characteristics of this very special place. The other of which, of course, are the magnificent views, not only of it, but from it. Those are my 4 very brief lessons.
John, that was really wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's something that's come up in quite a few of the presentations, certainly, is that you guys aren't working alone. There are huge groups of people and large communities that back up the work that you're doing. And that's an area I'd like to come back to later in the discussion. But to start off and to kick us all off with a question that hopefully we can all get behind, is a big one, I'm afraid. But I'm going to ask you all, what to you is the main risk to the spirit of place in the cities that we've been talking about today? And from a positive perspective, what can we do to mitigate some of them? Now, to go back to the beginning, maybe Nada, I can start with you. Puts you on the spot a little bit, but I'm hoping that you'll be feeling up to the challenge. Passing over to you.
Yeah. I guess based on just my experience of working in Benghazi, the biggest threat would be this general apathy or a sense of a lack of importance towards heritage sites and cultural heritage. I think, and we've seen this in Benghazi, there are plans, for example, where they want to demolish an important landmark or cultural heritage site, but people's, the importance that these places have for people allow them to push back, allow them to fight back. And we have seen this actually in the city where Solidaire, which did the reconstruction of Beirut city center in a way that was quite controversial because many people felt like they did more damage to the heritage of this space. They came to Benghazi to propose something similar. And it was local activists who pushed back against these plans for complete sort of redevelopment of the area, which would see more buildings lost. And so I think for me, as long as there is this feeling by regular people in the city of the importance of these places to them, this is the most useful tool. And any kind of indifference or apathy could be one of the biggest threats to reviving them. Because if these places are not important to people, then really the question asks itself, why keep them?
Really, really good way of putting it. The utility of a site is, in fact, such a groundswell force for restoration or reinvigoration. John, that echoes quite nicely with something you were saying about Amedi looking like Amedi rather than looking like Amman. So would you like to carry on with your views on the risks and the issues here?
So I think Nada's picked up the first one, which is that neglect. So places which just fall into decay. So there's one end of the extreme, which is neglect, but there is that other end of the extreme, which is in the drive to modernize, you can create this sort of anywhere bland architecture, which isn't rooted in Amedi or in Benghazi or Beirut or wherever it might be. So for me, that's kind of like the opposite end, where you're really it's trying to encourage the planners and people who live in those places to celebrate and enhance the very distinctive character of those places. That for me is both the biggest risk, the bland architecture, versus the opportunity, because if you get it right, then both it becomes a wonderful place in which to live and work, and it becomes a wonderful place to visit. So that would be my answer.
Brilliant, John. And that leaves Shireen. What were your biggest issues?
Yeah, actually, there are many challenges facing the protection of heritage in the city. again, I would say the lack of expertise among the government staff, this is one of the main major problem there in our region. Also, based on my observation, we could say also the people themselves, the owners, the unrealistic compensation demand of the owners, it's also one of the major problems in the city. That's why we see that there is continuous replacement of the historic buildings with new architecture, new materials of construction. For a long time, the people in this district, specifically in this district, they were suffering from the government policy during Saddam time, because a lot of land were taken from those people, from the owners, for the military purposes, and also for the construction of palaces for Saddam and for his family. So, and even now, the people around in the villages around the city, they are also the target of the Turkish campaign, military campaign. So it's not easy for the government themselves to convince the investors to invest their money invest their money in the city and even around the city for the tourism activities. So I think those points are the major problems we face in our country.
Thank you for that. It's quite a negative place to start the conversation. I do apologize, but sometimes it's just a good idea to get the background to some of these issues so that we can maybe have a productive conversation now to follow on with. And I'd like to stick, if I may, with this idea of people, as Shireen's talking about. In fact, there's an element in everyone's presentation. Nada, you talked about inheriting a broken system, which I thought was a very kind of key issue to address early on. This isn't a new problem in many places, it's an existing one. And as you equally well put, these problems don't stop when the fighting does. Now, let's look a little bit at that engagement. How can we get the local communities, especially younger generations, which was another thing that's come up twice now, feel engaged with their heritage? What are the proactive ways of doing that? I'm also going to just factor in a little insight we've had from the audience. One of the statements here says, have any of the panelists used, forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, charrette or charité, or similar forms of community engagement in developing policies for conservation? Now, I'll put my hands up and say I'm not familiar with it, but perhaps you guys, the experts, can tell me, starting with Nada.
Yeah, you pronounced it correctly, it's charrette. So what we've found when it comes to community engagement is who is doing the engaging. With a lot of communities, especially in post-conflict settings, there is a lack of trust and a huge paranoia around who is coming in, who is getting involved. And there is, of course, also, I guess, a lack of trust and a fragmented relationship, even with the local council, with politicians. So what we've often tried to do is work with neighborhood groups, neighborhood councils, which actually formed by themselves after the conflict to help bring people back to conflict-affected areas, and who are liaising with the government. So people who are well trusted, active in their communities, working with civil society activists as well, people who have created a name and a reputation for themselves to be able to work in these spaces. In particular, in Libya, the Scouts network, the Boy Scouts and Girl Guides, is a very, very trusted and very well-respected entity, which have been doing a lot of work on reconstruction and rehabilitation as well. And so having those partners or those actors on your side to help with your engagement, we found is really the best way to go forward. Yeah, I would say, I guess, in terms of that kind of engagement.
Excellent. Shireen, you had some great examples.
Yeah, actually, we have engaged those young engineers, architects in our project. Mostly they were young, and they are the most motivated to keep and to protect their heritage rather than the grandfathers and fathers, because mostly they, for those owners, they themselves, they try to have as much as possible compensation to solve all these problems. But But for the young people, they are proud of their heritage, so it's easier to involve them in the activities of heritage protection. So I think even with the government staff, if we our target is the young, it will be better for the future development of the city.
I think quite often it's a misconception that heritage is just about older people thinking back in a kind of nostalgic way, but certainly in projects that I've come across, it certainly seems that that energy, that motivation, as you say, Shireen, is a real catalyst for change. John, you've worked across the Middle East and North Africa, and I wonder if there's some learnings that you could share with us from those projects and working with young people.
So I would echo both Nada and Shireen's view that actually speaking to young people is really important, and the enthusiasm that you get there, it plays through. So even if they are 11, 12-year-olds, such as the ones that we worked with in Amedi, as well as the students, really important, and you get a very different and passionate perspective on things. I'd also echo Nada's point, which is that it's important you have the right people speaking to the people that you're wanting to connect to. So it's no good necessarily myself coming in and trying to conduct interviews, not least because my Kurdish is terrible, but it's who people will trust in that context. There is a value, though, of an external organization coming in and actually just holding a bit of a mirror up to these places. So when, for example, World Monuments comes and works in Amedi, there is a bit of a stop moment when people from Amedi go, well, this is really important, isn't it? And so I think that there's a role that every organization and people can play.
Wonderful. Moving on a little bit away from young people and perhaps into a kind of more intangible area of discussion. It came up in everyone's presentation, so I'd be doing a terrible job if I didn't revisit this now. And I suppose a good question here would be, what does a successful town or city feel like to people who live in it? It's not necessarily what it looks like structurally, but what is a successful town project in terms of the impact to people, sustainability, and the feeling that it gives, the spirit of place? Nada, I'll just pass to you for this one.
It's not an easy question to answer, and I guess there's no formula for how do you make a good place. I think a lot of it depends on people's sense of ownership of where they are, people's contribution to making that space. We've found something as simple as encouraging people to plant trees in the park will help them maintain and take care of that park. And I think that's what people really value in the places that they live, which is that they feel like they have a hand in helping to shape them. And I think memory as well also plays a really important role. So Benghazi city center is important to me, not because I'm from Benghazi. I never grew up there. It's an area that is new to me, but walking there with my father and hearing his memories of the place and how important it was to his childhood, I think creates the sense of importance for me and for a lot of young people from Benghazi as well, that this is a heritage that we are inheriting. And that link to memory also makes that place really special.
Wonderful. Shireen, I'd like to pass to you next, if that's okay. I'm on mute telling you you're on mute, which I think is...
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's not an easy question, as Nada said. Yeah, I think if the people are proud of their heritage and they are involved in the protection of the heritage, such a city like Amedi, this could be, the attachment of the places that they have. If we keep this, I think this is the wonderful city if we live with the tangible heritage that they have. Because my presentation was so short, I was not able to bring all the heritage dimensions in my presentation. But if you visit the city and see their intangible heritage and how they are proud of this intangible heritage, and feel that this is a very good place for them, and they are proud of the heritage that they have. But still, the important step, it should start from the government. They have to, the initiative should start from them to protect the heritage there.
Thank you, Shireen. John, how about with you? You spoke very eloquently about the intangible heritage that you've come across. Perhaps you'd like to expand on that.
Yeah, so I think it's, I think there's a lot about social space actually in any place. So how usable is the city, the town, the village? In the case of Amedi, how many, where can you have that social space, that place where you can have a conversation, talk with your neighbours in a space which is conducive to that. So I think my first point would be social space, really important. And my second point is actually also working space, so spaces which are used as part of the fabric. And the addendum to that is that working spaces are rarely neat and tidy. So I think there's got to be some relaxation about, you're not trying to create over-polished, over-restored heritage here. It's kind of, there's a bit of not necessarily clean, not necessarily tidy, but just wonderfully rich, usable space. That for me, those social space and working space, but it's not tidy.
Excellent. There's a lovely question here from Abhilasha, who asked, for a place where the conflict isn't particularly over, with some unsettled activities continue and some communities still hold that little bit of friction, do you have any insights on how to start a dialogue of normalcy in what is essentially a very complicated situation? When's the right time to do this? Is it better to wait? Nada, you talked a little bit about the symbolism of reconstruction, and actually, again, what John was saying there about perfection isn't the absolute kind of pinnacle of success here. It's about providing space. Over to you to tell us a little bit more, if you can, in answer to Abhilasha's question.
Yeah. I guess it's not a matter of when you start or stop. The community themselves will start. Even during the conflict, while it was ongoing, people were still doing reconstruction. And that's something I mentioned at the beginning, where this timeline of conflict is not linear and it's not clear. It's not conflict starts, reconstruction stops, but rather it happens and it's weaved in. In a place like Benghazi, I would say that the conflict officially is over, but unofficially we're seeing different forms of conflict emerging. And it is a constant struggle, and I think it's something that we're going to grapple with for the coming decades. I don't think the reconstruction process is going to be over once the final building is renovated, but rather we have to contend with a lot of historic grievances. We have to contend with a lot of social grievances. It is, as you say, very complicated because there's many layers to it: political, economic, historical. But I think it's something that people are already trying to address through different dialogue. And I think a really interesting tool that we're seeing this take place now is online. So people are having conversations about the conflict, about what happens after, about who has the right to come back to the city, who has the right to live there. So these conversations are already taking place. And I think it's just about being very sensitive to a lot of these factors, and letting the community lead the way on it.
Thank you. Shireen, would you like to add anything to that? Just unmuting there.
Okay.
Love.
Yeah. Okay, so the question, it was for me, sorry?
Yes, just if you'd like to add anything about when's the right time to engage on kind of reconstruction or projects that look at restoring areas.
Yeah, I think involving the people in the process of protection, it's something critical, really. This is what I understood from the example of Amedi, because after we start with the people and raising awareness among them regarding the valuable heritage that they have, the valuable houses that they own, so they start to ask for a realistic compensation. So we have to design based on the context, I think. So this is in terms of the involvement of the people. And it depends on the context from the government project. It depends on the context. For example, in Iraq, we are in an economic crisis, so there is no projects. So and the people, they have their own needs, so they have to change their houses. Mainly the ladies, they ask for changes because it's easier for them to clean with the new materials rather than the stone buildings. So I think it depends on the context. You have to address the context very well, the city very well, and then select and design the stages.
Excellent. And so we're back to this idea of an individual response that's tailored to the needs of different people in different places, doing essentially different things at different times. But if that's not too much to overcome, John, you might have some insights about timing response. And also there's a little question here from Rob in the chat that says, which organizations are looking to support in new areas of conflict like Ethiopia, Myanmar? I know World Monuments Fund does some incredibly dynamic work. Would you like to spend a moment just explaining that?
Yeah, so we have something called our crisis response program. So we constantly scan the horizon to see where crisis, whether it's war or natural disaster, is happening, and then thinking about how we can help. So we're proactively a part of that. And in terms of answering the question about when is it right to step in and when not, I think that's been beautifully answered by Shireen and Nada. My addition to that would be that we've been working in Yemen, for example, in the city of Taiz, where we're working for many years now. That place is still, the conflict still rumbles on in Yemen alongside economic chaos, alongside COVID, alongside other starvation, all kinds of terrible things. And yet, even in Yemen, we're managing to work with local people to reconstruct a palace, the National Museum complex. And the reason that people want that is because it does reflect a return to normality and a bit of the kind of humanity being restored as part of that physical restoration. So I think there's lots of different ways. If we're talking about Syria at the moment, there's very few organizations which are working in Syria for lots of different reasons, but we're working on the fringe of Syria, training people in anticipation of eventually that crisis will be over. So training, for example, Syrian refugees in conservation stonemasonry so that they can have the skills to restore their own heritage once the conflict is over. Lots of different answers.
Perfect. That's a great summary, actually. Now, before we all leave, we've got coming up for the last minute. I've got one more poll question to ask you all, which is going to pop up on your screens momentarily. And I'm just going to round things off for us here. So it's bringing us to the end of today's discussion, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. I hope you all have too. I'm going to bring our exploration of this subject, which has gone in all sorts of directions, and we could spend many more hours doing this. I'm going to ask each of the speakers to give you their final thoughts, a couple of sentences, if you will. As well as asking your audience a final polling question, which will pop up on your screens. I'm hoping now. Excellent, look at that magic. I didn't even use my hands. Terrific, if you could all just take a quick read of that, and I'll hand back over to John to give us his last thoughts for today's discussion.
So my last thoughts are really simple, and that is, I've been to Amedi several times. Go there. It's a place where you can go, and I hope in the future to return to Benghazi, a city which I knew in my very earliest youth. So, actively go and see these places. It's not well, Amedi, not difficult.
Terrific. Shireen.
Sorry, I was focusing reading the points, so could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Too much to take in.
Yeah, it's done.
Excellent. Now, your last question is rounding things off. Neda, would you like to offer us your final thoughts for today's session?
I think it's been a very useful session just for me to see what's happening now in Amedi, and seeing the experience of Shireen and Saman and what World Monuments Fund are doing. These kind of events are really, they're more helpful than you can imagine, just to take these lessons and also to know that you're not reconstructing alone, that this is not a situation that is unique to you. And I think this is very important in a place like Benghazi, where sometimes it can feel like we're isolated from the rest of the world, that there is support, that there is resources out there. And by bringing it all together, really, I think I am very hopeful and very optimistic for the future of Benghazi.
That's terrific. Yeah. So thank you so much. Now I think that's it from me. Shireen, did you want to add a final thought? Yes, please.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was great, really, the discussion. I hope that World Monument Fund will continue to support us in Amedi, at least to have a even tiny real project there. So just to show the people there that this is our thought for the city. And to encourage the government to start prioritizing the heritage conservation plans within their plans. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, Shireen. So that's it from me. I'm going to sit back and try and absorb a lot of what we've discussed today. I think there's lots to take forwards with us. I'm going to hand you back over to Nicholas, who's going to close the session.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you, John, Shireen and Neda, for an absolutely scintillating 1 hour and 1 minute I think we've run. No one ever thanks the chair properly. The chair thanks the speakers, and someone needs to thank the chair, so I'm here to thank the chair. Laura, you chaired Neda, Shireen and John with aplomb and with gusto. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all to all our lovely attendees. I always forget to say, but I shall. I've remembered this time. We will be uploading a video of this. It'll be on the Create Streets YouTube account. Earlier on in the chat, I put that in the chat because I knew I would forget, as indeed I did in the last 2 minutes beforehand. I'm sure that the V&A and the World Monuments Fund will do so as well. But from our website, you can find that. So do please share that with any contacts, colleagues or friends who you think would be interested in this. Just one very final thought before we'll go around our ways, if I may, and I don't want to make a flippant comparison here. I was very struck by what the brilliant Neda just said. We're not alone. I don't feel alone listening to this. Do you know, in a strange way, and it's not the same, but urbanists and people thinking about the urban realm across the world, whether it's in an area of conflict or an area which has not seen conflict, actually face some of these same challenges. Some of the work we're currently doing in some of the poorer parts of the UK, it's not the same. I don't want to pretend that it is, but some of those challenges of this place feels like it's not getting what it needs some love, it needs some care, it needs the community to be able to influence more profoundly what happens. That really is the same. I mean, or at any rate, it rhymes. So I think there is a world community here of people who do want to invest in and love the heritage of the places they live in, be they rich, poor, left, right, up, down, and all the other things you can cut it. So you're not alone. Hopefully we're all together, joined by Zoom as hopefully soon in real life. And I hope to be able to take up John's suggestion to come to Amedi. I hope to that, and to meet Shireen in person. Thank you, and thank you, Laura, and thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.